Good morning, everyone. We are going to start in 2 minutes more just to give some space for the rest of the assistants. Thank you very much for joining us.
Buenos días, Iván.
Well, so thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to greet you and welcome to our webinar, Your Next Step in Digital Transformation, Cybersecurity Meets Strategic Leadership, a leadership series on integrating talent, culture, and cybersecurity by AIMS International and Critical Matrix. I'm Luisa Vargas, manager of the Canadian chapter of Commerce in Mexico for the Western chapter, and it's my pleasure to introduce you our experts. Daniela Monsalvo and Nim Nadara. Danny is business manager at AIMS International Canada, representing 37 years of expertise in executive search and talent strategy. Daniela is a global talent strategist, specializing in empowering organizations to align leadership and talent with strategic goals. She has partnered with goal leaders with global leaders to address complex challenges, from digital transformation to team development, ensuring sustained success in competitive markets. And Nim is CISO and managing partner at Critical Matrix. Nim is recognized security leader and technology innovator with over 30 years of experience driving business-centric transformation. As CISO and managing partner at Critical Matters, he advises C-suites and achieving their vision through bridging the gap between business and technology and ensuring robust cybersecurity practices. Nim is a board member and headquarters Healthcare Center and former national director of the CIO Association of Canada. Nim has been recognized among Canada's top 100 business leaders and inducted into Who's Who in Canada 2024 publication. Welcome very much, Daniela and Nim. Let me give you the screen to and the micro to let you share with us your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Really appreciate it. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see the presentation? In full screen, not the
Thank
slides,
you.
right?
Yes.
Full screen. Perfect.
Well, thank you, Luisa and the CanTam community for having us again. Daniela and I are very excited to share with you the second webinar in our series. So today we're going to talk about embedding cybersecurity into your organizational culture. Just quick roadmap for today's session. We're going to recap the last webinar in case you missed it or you forgot some of the key takeaway from it was the 4 pillars of leadership accountability. So we're gonna cover that. The current state of cybersecurity culture, talk about common integration mistakes, issues in leadership and governance and operations and how they come together. We have some exciting neuroscience insights, real world examples, practical takeaways, and then talk a little bit about the leadership roundtable approach that we want to share. So with that, Daniela, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of recap what we did last time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Nim. And I echo your words. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're very excited because last time there were a lot of questions around the webinar about a topic that's really relevant for everyone. Things are changing at, a strike speed and we probably wonder how can I catch up with that and how can I actually do it right? So in our first webinar, for those of you who were not there, we started talking about what those transformation pillars should be all about. Very interesting here, the first stop, and we promised you a ride and we will continue to give you a ride. So the first stop was alignment. So asking ourselves as a leader, where am I standing? Am I isolated where I'm currently standing? Do I have the clarity that I need to lead my team? Am I asking myself the right questions? So many times when we are about to initiate a transformation in our companies, and I know many of you today are probably leading multiple transformations at a time, we need to ask ourselves the right questions and we need to make sure that we don't do it solo. So today, I also want to invite you to see us as your trusted partners and to share any questions that you might have around the way. We're here to make sure that those insights that might come up during the conversation are not only caught in the air, but are actually something that you take with you. Now, the second part of this road was engaging. So after I have the clarity as a leader of what I want to accomplish and how I want to accomplish it, we called it the buy-in. Okay, you have to secure the buy-in. Sometimes we only think about buying in or doing our pitches with our clients and externally and our providers, but what about our teams? Whenever a change is happening, and we're going to talk about that more widely today, but whenever change is happening, how certain, motivated, and sure they feel about what's going to happen and wanting to truly become a part of that. So we talked about the hidden resistance that the team might show, like slow or passive disengagement or other very human ways of reacting to change. And we will continue to share some of those today so you can read and connect with your team better and make sure that you're not only pushing change, you're actually addressing the resistance that was probably already there in your culture before change was even part of the equation. Nim is a fan on this one, so equipping your team, how to do it right. And one thing that Nim taught me on our very first conversations is that you don't have to go with the whole fancy package of acquiring this, and that, another tool. You don't need to go huge, but you need to be very smart when assessing your company, your teams, your tools, your processes to understand where you are standing. So as you are doing your buy-in, as you're asking yourself the right questions, you also want to make sure that when you equip your team, you don't give them 10 fancy tools, but you give them the ones that they will be able and understand on how to use them. So give them the right tools and they will be able to thrive. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that today, assessing governance, what this means. Now, on the next slide, and we're going to talk about now sustaining that change, how through culture. So, from compliance to ownership and what we mean by this. Let's start here because this is where most transformations quietly start to crack. And the truth is that, you know, as leaders, we think that we are leading a rollout, when in reality, what we're doing is that we want our teams to own the culture. Yeah. So if in this case, for example, we already have existing gaps in our culture as a company, sometimes we might fall under the trap of building very nice playbooks, very beautifully worded protocols, and we assign people to our governance committees and we believe that we're making them a part of things, but alignment will not always happen that way. True alignment at a cultural level. So here's the one shift that we want to invite you to make today. Governance is not only about compliance, okay? Governance, in this case, is about how to ask ourselves, instead of have we rolled this out correctly? Asking ourselves, Are we showing up the way, our teams need us to? So that clarity that we spoke about on our last webinar, today we're going to help you tackle what that should look like. And if you want to move to the next slide, Nim, we want to bring this concept to the table about the truthful shared responsibility. Okay, so if you're looking to make that shift today, first, stay with us today. But secondly, start with this. We need to start thinking of co-creating governance, not just top down, but shifting our languages from enforcement to shared responsibility. And most importantly, and Nim is going to agree with me on this one, we need to reinforce decisions that reflect our core values and not just showing up as a new rule in the team. Okay? At the end of the day, and I'm going to pass this on to Nim now, but at the end of the day, transformation will not happen because we told people what to do. It happens when they believe that they have a role in where we're going as a company. All right?
Totally agree. Totally agree with you, Daniela. You know, when you rule with policy, procedure, compliance, saying, hey, this is the regulation, you have to do it this way. The problem is when you read a document on Friday and then you have to come to work Monday morning, and now you have to do your work in a certain way, you don't relate to that procedure. You have no a personal engagement with that culturally or from a having done it before experience. So what happens is slowly people just diverge and they fall back into the old ways of doing things. You can't make change unless people can relate and understand the purpose of that change. That is fundamentally it's human behavior, right?
Mhm. Much
So
agree. Yeah.
excellent points.
So what should
Uh,
we do about that, Mr. Nim?
yeah. Well, governance and talent readiness, right? You got to have, you definitely need to have the right partners and the right players to work together. But more importantly, you need to have the right message that the employees, as well as the leadership and the board of your organization, understand. So, you know, change is inevitable. It's the one thing that we know. It's one of the three things we know is going to happen in life, right? There's going to be death, there's going to be taxes, and there's going to be change. These three things we cannot avoid. And change, digital transformation. So my generation, I think I've been one of the luckiest generations to be alive. We've seen the birth of the computer, birth of the internet, birth of the cloud, birth of AI, and the adoption and integration of all of these into our industrial supply chain. So we talk about the fourth industrial revolution is, embracing, the semiconductor and all its powers, but it means a lot more than just saying, oh, we're using a new tool. Uh, Misaligned leadership, not having the right people at the table to help not just do the work, but also clarify the message, the value, and the purpose of the work, and then governing. These are reasons why technology transformations have changed. We talked about it in our first meeting. I'm not going to go into the details, but we all know about Mio. We've probably read or seen about their breach. It comes down to the whole breach and everyone's data being leaked, including the selfies that you were taking to validate who you were when you signed up for their services, was misconfigured cloud governance. And this was digital transformation that happened. The change occurred without governance, communication, people process, but technology happened. And then knowing that there was a vulnerability and not having done anything about it, just sitting there and wait until a crisis to resolve it. We want to make sure this is all avoided. So the leadership side of things is leading with emotional clarity.
Mhm.
Um, Daniela, you've had many years of experience dealing on the people side of the business, expressing and supporting executives through, how do you lead change in an organization?
Mhm.
share some of your perspectives here on leading with emotional clarity.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing is very powerful. And by the way, when Nim and I started our very first conversations, I was so proud of myself using all of those AI tools. And, I already use them. And Nim had to pull my ear and say, are you doing it the right way? So I really want to stress that. That's really just as important, okay? Let's be savvy, but let's know how to do things. And in that sense, I think that many of the all of the changes that are occurring today, AI, technology, the politics that are occurring at a regional level, it's all affecting us for the first time, both leaders and team members. And that means that there has to be a lot of emotional clarity amidst change. So as tricky as that might sound, there are a couple of takeaways that we can share with you and that have really worked. And we're not reinventing the wheel here, but we want to stress how valuable is to create safety in your teams. Okay. And that safety in your culture, in your way of doing things, is what will unlock participation. So I'm not even going to get into the aspect of transforming before you have a team that is willing to participate because they feel safe. So, how can I do that? How can I accomplish my team to truly be engaged? Start with the basics, okay? You need to, as a leader, and your team around you, who is guiding your employees and everyone for the first time in many changes, you need to make sure that in your culture, early feedback and early on questions are not only accepted or normalized, they are expected. Many times you will be wondering why you had this very important announcement to make and you invited everyone in your team and nobody asked questions. And you asked yourself, did I say it so nicely and so clearly that everyone really understood? Or is it that maybe your team is not even sure how this affects them? So
Mm-hmm.
they just stay quiet, they nod in meetings, and they just hope that they don't mess up. We've all been there, right? But as you see, transformation will not be technical, it will be deeply emotional. So we, our invitation to you, what we have seen is that you need to also use narratives to explain the whys, not the whats. And Nim said that. And part of that is that you have very simple narratives and very clear as well, where I want to stress this. Your team member needs to understand where they fit in whichever transformation that you are doing. At their role levels, they need that clarity. And you need to connect their motivations with whichever motivation is taking you to change things in the company. Mhm. So,
Amen.
how can we do that? Let's train our leaders to hold that space for effective dialogue, trustful, meaningful, and relevant, and that you're willing to give and receive that feedback. Mm.
Absolutely. Change without understanding the purpose and impact of the change is the most meaningless experience ever, right? And great segue to the next slide, Daniela, because the human side of secure transformation, um, we're all afraid when going through change that, especially at work, going through this change means we might make a mistake. We're going to do it wrong. And those mistakes might have consequences. And we may not fully understand the consequences, so that just piles on to the fear, which then affects the throughput, which then affects the quality, which then results in a real mistake being made, and then that mistake becomes, really bad for the company. Um, you know, Culture is shaped by meaning. And just because we send an email to everybody saying, hey, here's the new protocol, you have to follow this. If you don't, we're going to have issues. That's not the right way to affect change in the organization. We're all, adults too. And the way my 5-year-old daughter learns is very different from the way a 45, 50-year-old adult learns. And the relationship between how we consume that information, process that information, and apply it to reality is very different. But a lot of times we stick to the way we learned in school. Somebody gave you a book, you read the book, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to write an exam, I'm going to pass the exam. And, yeah, we do certifications. We all do these things this way, but that's not the best way to train for security. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, you're just answering the question. You're writing it to pass, right? Um, let's talk about most breaches that happen. 85% of them trace back to human failure. We are still the weakest link until AI can do my job, and then I can blame AI for the cybersecurity mistake. It's still going to be my job as a human. And we get phished. We accidentally transfer the wrong amount to the vendor. We change bank accounts because we were convinced that it was the right person that we were paying. These are all human error factors that come in. Yes, there's that 15% of, yeah, it wasn't a human, but very seldom do hackers work that hard to get what they need. They usually can fool a human very easily, and that's what they're going after. Security initiatives and companies today are very much treated as a tool project. We are rolling out XYZ tool. We are doing ABC training. But we don't talk about the behavior we need to change to make us more secure. I can have the best locks on my house. I can create in Canada, we can buy a key. It's called a security key with a security lock. You can't take the key to make a copy of the key anywhere. You have to just buy keys from the factory. But if I don't teach everyone in my home, when you leave, you have to stop, turn around, lock the door, test it, and then walk away, doesn't matter if I have the greatest lock. I haven't created the behavior that's going to create security. I've put in a tool. I've put in a lock, right? Policy and practice. Policies don't usually elicit or solicit ownership. They just dictate what we think. It's a rule, right? It's a governance. So typically, because we read a document doesn't mean we're going to follow the steps in the document. We also typically don't implement the correct tools to follow whether or not the policy is being put into practice. So there's usually a big disparity between management saying, I've told everyone to do it this way, and people like actually doing it this way or not doing it this way. And then, of course, that results in, whatever the exposure is to the organization, non-compliance, erosion of trust. People are quarreling. I told you to do this. Why don't you do it this way? Now we have these problems. And where this falls apart is really integration of that, the people layer, the governance layer, and the technology layer throughout your change journey. Of course, we use the word integration, and now it's integration pitfalls, right? We're going to slide right into integration pitfalls. Leadership's perspective on cybersecurity. Everyone, when you hear that word, you almost always think of your computer. And when you think about your computer, you think about it being an IT problem, right? When we use the word governance, you immediately think about, the law, right? And then you're like, oh, it's a compliance issue, the governance word. It's we got to talk to the lawyer or the privacy officer. We don't usually associate that with a behavior, saying, it's something that somebody does, not something that somebody reads, right? And then the fatigue is real. Like, we some of the companies that we are fortunate to work with, there's maybe 20 to 50 projects happening in the company. Some are big, some are small. But then you have employees who are impacted by this 20 to 50 initiative change, right? Even if you do 5 initiatives, if you're a smaller company, that's change. It's impacting the way people do their jobs. It's impacting the way the information that they're creating is being shared within the organization. It's a lot to take in. And it's a lot to take in, especially when we don't make an effort to make sure that they can relate to the change that's happening. And then the cultural misfit. So it's easy to say, yeah, we're going to put the best possible lock on this door, and ignore the fact that, right in front of the lock, there's 5 steps. So if somebody turns around to lock the door, you turn around quickly, you're going to fall down the steps, right? So there's a misfit between the way the protocol is delivered and how people really have to do the work. So to lock the door, you need to be able to safely turn around, step back, and lock it, not end up falling down the steps because nobody really thought about that when they chose the lock and the process around the locking. Daniela, you've got a lot of experience, in sort of the human change and human impact of this. Like, add some color.
Yeah, and I think that I want to zoom into the fatigue part because the fatigue is real. And it happens, and we've seen that together, and him and I, that when we start assessing a company that is ready to create change, implement a certification, a new model, a new tool, usually those assessments, they uncover several gaps or probable weaknesses that were already there. So on top of changing or implementing things, you also need to start patching up all of those, old issues that were just laying on the shelf and they were never really addressed. So yes, it's tiring. But as leaders, I want to stress something. And it's really powerful. You have no idea. You would be surprised at how powerful it is for a leader to say, you know what? I don't have all the answers, but I'm listening. So that fatigue can many times be broken through that vulnerability of knowing as a leader when it is the right place, in the right tone, and with the righteous purpose, addressing issues and saying, I know this is how it affects you, and I see that. This is how we can support you. So that's the culture we're going to talk about developing. And yes, we're still figuring some of it out too. That's extremely powerful. And if we go to the next slide, Nim, governance, I loved how you said it yourself. Governance is more than just a page, a cross-checking of doing things on paper. What governance tells your people is that this is what matters, this is what we prioritize, and this is how we make decisions. That's the message that you're providing at a people level, at a talent level. So more than a structure, we need to start looking at governance as a statement for my company culture. Okay. And Nim will definitely agree with me on this one. Governance, your governance cannot be rigid. It has to be seen and perceived as having constant room for improvement. So here, in a people perspective, what we have seen with many of the companies that we have supported through this journeys is that what you want is for your governance to become not just a process, but an actual leadership signal. It has to be your thermometer at the end of the day. A signal of what? That your people have the clarity to move, to decide, and to contribute without second guessing what's allowed and what is not. That's usually where stagnation happens. Things might be very clear on paper, but then you put someone with the tools, you give them the checklist, and they still do not feel ready to deliver. So what governance is truly building here is trust. The trust that even if I don't do things right, my company culture will support me. We talked just a few slides before about accountability. Accountability sometimes might sound to our employees as I'm pointing a finger. I just want to know who did things wrong, Accountability has to be seen as shared responsibility. I am a part of this. I want to be a part of this, Okay.
Daniela, many times we're very quick to point at people to show what they did wrong. But how many times do we point at people and we say, oh, you did this right, right? So
Hmm.
usually there's only one employee of the month award. But so many people did the right thing, but we only call out the person who did the wrong. And it it highlights the wrong accountability there, right? From a leadership perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely, definitely. So just one question I wanna bring with you guys today before we move on is that how much as leaders are we getting enough cross-functional insight? And by that I mean usually as leaders we're very isolated in our processes. Do I have enough trusted allies and partners around me that are going to help me understand and interpret those insights? Who else should be contributing to our governance decisions? That's just a question I want to leave as food for thought before we move on to the cultural pillars.
Mhm. It's a very good question for everyone to sort of think introspectively, think amongst yourselves, right? Like, how does this work? Um, we obviously, I think everyone figured out, Daniela, you and I love pillars because the first webinar had 4 pillars.
Yeah.
Now this webinar has 3 pillars. There's a prize for anybody who guesses how many pillars are in the next webinar. Let's
We
um,
promise people are right, right?
yes. Um, Leadership accountability is a pillar that we want you to take away this time. Talent readiness is a pillar we want you to take away this time, and cultural integration. And we're going to talk a little, like, take you through what each one kind of means and double click on it. But a high level, um, ownership in terms of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to get there, and being open and sharing that is very important as leadership. And leadership accountability also stands in the way of making sure, as leaders, we own the win and we own the loss. If the transformation doesn't work, it's not everyone else's fault. It's the leader because we had the chance to set it up for success. What did we do wrong that, obviously didn't get us there? um, talent readiness, role-based security expectations, contextual training. And this applies whether you're doing security or you're just doing a new CRM or a new ERP or a new MRP, manufacturer resource planning platform. It's how are you making very clear how each individual is affected by the outcome that we want to get? And cultural integration, right? What are these rituals that have to become habits that we need to follow? How our work changes and performance structure from the perspective that let's not talk about the punishment, but let's talk about the bigger reward that everyone gains if this is a success. Let's not focus on what happens if this goes wrong, right? We don't want that fear mongering. Let's focus on what happens if this goes right. So Daniela, I know that we've got a few slides on the pillars, so I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you. I agree with you that things need to be measured. And again, we need to know what to measure and how to. And I think that's where Nim is really good at. But from the leadership perspective, the human side of things, sometimes as leaders we fall into the trap that and KPI sometimes can make us feel that way that we need to push things forward, right? We need to make someone accountable for X or Y. And usually I strongly believe that accountability gets misunderstood all the time. And you said it, Nim, it's about creating clarity and visibility. So instead of knowing whom I can blame if X part of the process does not come as expected, what we want as leaders during transformation and this new culture that we are creating is that we want accountability to be all about visibility. Okay. And by visibility, I mean that clarity of this is what's on my side, this is what's on his side, this is my room for improvement, and this is where I can start working things out. Sometimes whenever there is a new process, this happens very often, and we see that. Sometimes the team member does not act because he didn't know that that was on his lap, you know? And yeah, unfortunately, many will not act proactively, but not because they don't want to, they're just as confused. So the first thing we want to stress out here is that accountability has to be modeled, okay? And that accountability will come through clarity. So what I'm trying to say here is that we as leaders have the opportunity of creating a culture where people want to own outcomes, not avoid responsibility. How? This is how we envision success. This is what success looks for us in terms of the goals we're trying to accomplish through this transformation. And this is how you can be a part of it. This is how this will also affect you positively, your growth, your experience, your new role. So your team will want to own that outcome, not avoid that responsibility. Okay. So we really stress that. One question that I'm also gonna bring here today is, and this is something that we always ask our the leaders that we work with when we're starting to want to transform things. Have you actually defined what you're asking your teams to be accountable for? Or are we just assuming they know? Because then again, that's where the bottlenecks happen. Okay.
Mhm.
We've seen a couple of those, right, Nim?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now let's talk about that talent readiness. And not not tech readiness, not process readiness yet, human readiness. Okay. And it's true. I loved how you put it, Nim. Before you make a change, you need to create and sustain the behavior for that change to actually stick. And that's the last part of our last webinar's journey, sustaining. I did all of this effort and it didn't really stick. Why? There was not a sustained behavior behind that. Okay. So the hardest part of change is usually the in-between. And by the in-between, we mean that your team might know what's expected if you did the accountability part right. Great. But now they are unsure of how to get there. That's the in-between. That's the talent readiness. Okay. So you might have a team that is fully trained, or you might not even know yourself what to train them in yet. But it's very human to be hesitant when acting. It's very human. And sometimes it's not that your team doesn't understand what's expected of them anymore, but they are actually unsure of how things will land. And I said it earlier, and I will say it again. What will sustain and support your team is your culture. This means that your culture is saying to everyone very out and clear, even if things don't go the way we expected, we are here to support you. Our culture is going to support you. And then they feel confident to act. Okay, so again, trust really plays a role here.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And then that should tie into cultural
Cultural
integration.
integration. That's correct. So that's where we really want to zoom in today. And thank you very much for the questions that you're sharing. I think that the part of transformation that's the hardest to measure, but most critical to get right is culture. Let's put aside transformation for a second. You as a company, are you clear on what your company culture stands for? Before we start doing all of the technical changes, NIM usually takes, our clients and we take them to tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you standing? What do you stand for? What do your companies believe that they stand for? So, yes, usually we talk about a shared purpose and we talk about a mission and we talk about a vision, but the interesting part about culture is that what culture really tells you is that when nobody's watching, how is your team acting? How am I acting as a leader? Okay. So, culture is really what happens in meetings, in moments of tension, in those moments when you're hesitant, when you don't have that clarity. So it also really happens in the way that we talk about failure. It talks about in the questions that we believe we are allowed to ask. It happens on how we take that accountability as a team. So, we want to make a zoom in today on some of the real cases of what culture looked like during this transformation and how that will impact you and make sure that changes are sustained.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, in all things human, whether we talk about AI or we talk about, or whether we talk about changing and transformation, we're talking about human behavior, and it comes down to neuroscience. It comes down to how our minds work ever since, being a child, learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to, run, learning to act. All of these things involve habits. And these habits come from neurons in our minds creating pathways, which mean logic. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we also have to deal in our case with the subconscious as well as the conscious mind of people. How many times you walk into a room, like you walk in a group of people, you see somebody you go straight to say hi to them and you talk to them. You're in the room, but if I ask you what was the chandelier, you didn't pay attention. You completely tuned that out because there was no reason for you to look up and say, "Oh, what a beautiful chandelier in this room," right? That ability for us to change a pattern behavior, to get people to pay attention to things that they usually will not pay attention to, is changing a fundamental behavioral part of who they are. It's not going to be, hey, you read the policy, right? The policy said you look up. They're not going to look up. We have to train them. It's a habit loop in order for them to look up, right? Um, Fear-based training. This is something that we all do. If you don't do it, you're going to get fired. Just suck it up and figure it out, right? That's not the right way, right? Or if you don't do this, you're going to get hacked. And if you get hacked, the company's going to go bankrupt and everyone's going to get fired. It's not the right way to do it. Um, Fear is
Let
not.
me,
Oh.
if I may, Nim, let me
Yeah,
just
jump
jump
in.
in there for that fear training. We've all seen that, right? Um, this is one question that we always ask our allies, our partners, whenever we're implementing change, and that is, what's one leadership behavior that I, as a leader, could change today that would make my team feel safer during change? Okay, so training's not wrong, implementing changes is not wrong, but my traits and how I communicate them is what's going to make all the difference. So I just want to jump in there because that's very true. We've all been through that fear-based
100%.
training.
100%. And, fear-based goes both ways. I was speaking to a CISO of one of our clients, and he said, Nim, we're a small business. I don't have time for any of this soft, fluffy stuff. They work for me. Here's the order. Do it or lose your job. I said, okay. So you can take that approach. And what if they don't listen to you anyway? He goes, oh, then I have to, I will show them the consequences of because, I'm the boss. Like, okay. But what if you made a little bit of an effort and you did it, differently and they listened to you? What would the outcome be? Oh, yeah, I can tell you right now who the people will be like that will listen anyway. So I'm just doing this change. I'm spending this extra time and money on this other stuff for maybe this percentage of my company. So then I asked the question, what is the risk if that percent doesn't comply? Like, what if you had to prove your muscle, you had to fire? What is the impact to the bottom line of the company? Hiring new people, retraining people, going through that dip before you can get back up to, forming, storming, norming, performing, right? And he paused. He goes, you know what? You're actually right. I was in a hurry to just shove this down everyone's throat to go get it done, but maybe that's not the best approach I should be taking. So it's as, in Danny and my role, we have to put a little bit of fear and thought process into the people that we're working with to say, hey, yeah, you can do this, but what if you did it differently and it worked? Like what? Like it's 50-50 on the positive side, right? And I think that's what we need to start thinking about as leaders and companies is what is the art of the possible, not saying, I expect the worst outcome anyway, right? It's a mindset change for us too as leaders. Anything else we should cover, Danny, on this one?
Very true, very powerful. I do agree with you. And I think that what's really gonna make us swift here is that your culture, you should start seeing your culture as your nest. Okay? So by a nest, I mean my team is going to thrive when they feel that they are being a part of things, they are being included, they are being asked, they are being taken into account. So, yes, they need the clarity, they need the rules, they need the governance, and they need the checklists, but they also need to connect at a personal level. And neuroscience is a very powerful word, and I'm sure we have heard that under several contexts, right? But what we're trying to invent here is that it is possible to change and transform things technically and mindset speaking. It is possible when you have that clarity.
Absolutely, Danny. Absolutely. Um, I talked about a few examples throughout the webinar of actual live situations where, um, in the interest of time, I'm going to cover case B for the audience. And if you want to hear some cool stories, email Danny and I. Like we can tell you many stories of, how from cybersecurity perspective and digital transformation, things went well and when things went bad. We have some very good examples. And there's no better lesson than learning from the mistakes of other people because it's free, right? They made the mistake, they got hit with the cost. You can just learn from it. Healthcare network, really passionate about it. I'm on the board of a hospital without naming names. They reduced, they got phished and it cost them a lot of money. Penalties, regulator, health data being breached, communication, lawyers, like tons of stuff. So their goal was to reduce this by a significant percentage, and they achieved 68% by simply integrating the habit training into daily workflows. They didn't send a video once a month saying, hey, you have to sit here, watch this for 20 minutes, answer 5 questions. If you get over 80%, you're passing. Otherwise, we're going to email your manager that you failed and you have to do it again. They didn't do that because obviously that's what they were doing for the last 5 years. It didn't work and they got fished. So they integrated it into what people do every day. Their learning, their training, their execution of testing. And all of a sudden, people were 68% less likely to get fished because it became relatable, it was integrated into culture, and most importantly, workflow.
Mm.
So simple example, but it's a big win when you can get employees to relate the change that you want to create to the risk and the outcome uh, with familiarity, right? Watching a video of Nim and Danny went for coffee and Nim saw Danny's password, it's not relatable, right? Um, the content doesn't work. Let's talk about our practical exercises, Danny.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that on the last slide, we hear more often on the key behavioral indicators, the KPIs, and many companies see them as a nice to have. So just a disclaimer here that they're more powerful than you think. And if you connect your KPIs with your KPIs, then you're going to give your team all the clarity that they need. So now
Did we lose Danny's audio?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. I think we lost Danny's audio.
Yes.
That's okay. While we're waiting for Danny to come back, practical exercises, right? So the leadership circle, small exercises you can do as a leadership team, and then have managers do as a management team. And we're using security as an example because it's the highest impact and highest risk to organizations today. But how do you get those ownership decisions assigned to people? And what are the gaps in the decision-making process associated with that? Behavior. Let's talk about the behaviors that cause the most risk to the organization. And again, this is a leadership discussion with your senior leadership team, your management team, those who, uh, defining lines of risk for the organization, right? And what are the risky behaviors? What are they doing? What stop, start, continue? And if we stop doing something and we want to change it, what's the risk? If we want to start doing something because we're not doing it, what's the risk? And creating this information in a way that is going back to the people doing the job that they can relate to. Governance check-in, which is evaluating the current framework. What is the governance that we're doing within the company? How are we communicating this governance? Who is accountable for this governance? And is the process the blocker for getting the message to the people? Because then we have to change the process, right? Because it's there for the purpose of communicating and it's not working. I think Danny's back. Can you hear us, Danny? Can we hear you?
Yes, I'm here. We
Awesome.
need to
All
check on
right.
my
I,
cybersecurity.
I didn't do as great a job as you would have, but I tried to fill in, but obviously jump
Yeah,
in.
thank you. You know what? Let me just compliment you here because I think that you shared some very valuable insights. I just want to do a little leadership pulse check. I think that yes, we are pillar lovers. That's the truth. There needs to be a clear roadmap for you as a leader and for your team as well. So out of these three takeaways, very powerful takeaways, and the pillars that we have shared during the call, I think that I would really like to invite you all to ask yourselves, in a lot of honesty, what is the pillar that has challenged you the most? And I am asking this because as part of this journey, that's waiting for you to grow into, that pillar that is your pain point today, that's your next leadership edge. Okay. So if you want real transformation to begin, then you need to start building the foundations. And that's the culture. So today we're going a step back. We're not telling you how to change things. We're telling you how to have fertile soil. So I invite you to see us as your trusted allies in transformation, in doing the leadership pulse check, in asking yourself the right questions. Um, I think that for us is really enriching to hear your own experiences and share some of our own as well. So feel free to email us. And I think, Nim, that we can leave just room for questions very briefly.
Hmm. We have a engaging room. So yeah, everyone, ask your question in the chat. We're happy to answer. And Danny and I are here for you. We would love to, one-on-one in a safer room in front of instead of in front of everyone. You can also reach out to us for a 30-minute meeting, 15-minute meeting. Hey, I'm trying to do this. We're not transactional people. We want to be here to help you and show you the path. And as long as we provided value and guidance to you, we're happy to invest the time.
Absolutely. It's an honor. Yeah, I much agree with you.
And this is what happens when when you have passion for what you do and you're an expert. Thank you very much, Nim and Danny. You got us. We are so empathized with you. Of course, I would like to read some comments that we had during the sessions from Ivan Lobo. If you involve the people in all aspects of the project, they will build part of the goal and the engagement will come.
Let me bring some complexity into that statement. The other day we were talking about generational diversity. So the different motivations And those layers of complexity come in what motivates me as an individual. And what used to motivate someone from the baby boomers or Gen X and Gen Z is completely different. Now put that in a context. I, as a company, have a goal. And what motivates someone to be here sitting today with me is completely different than what motivates the other person. Do you want to uncover what those motivations are? Then I definitely agree with you, Ivan. You have to make them part of the process. Making them part of the process, your end goal is not that they are, they learn from the A to Z, is that it gives you room to uncover and understand and connect what motivates your people. So yes, 100% agree with you.
Of course. Thank you, then. And we have a question by Benjamin. The main challenge for the management of the company is to attract, of course, and retain the talent. I think the second is a biggest challenge. But how do you manage this?
I
So
think from I'll
no, go
answer
ahead.
quickly from a cyber perspective. I think the reason people leave organizations and cyber projects fail and tech projects fail is because there's been a lack of communication of the vision, communication of the purpose, and governance to execute the program to stay there. People get burnt out because they're doing too many things at the same time. And then as a security person, you quit your job because of fatigue. You're burnt out. There's too many things you need to look at, and it's just chaos every day. You're working late, you're working weekends. It's not desirable because it's not organized. Kind of follow our sort of the three pillars approach to engage with leadership and sort of keep the team engaged through communication, purpose, and understand what the outcome is in order to get them to stay. Danny?
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is very powerful. And I just read Evan's comment saying that motivation comes from within us. So I would say that in order to attract and retain the I don't want to say the right people. I want to shift the question to, am I the right company for these people? So to attract, you have to be very clear and align your purpose to the purpose of that person. If you do that, you will attract them. Not there either to retain them, but that's where you jump in this constant asking and this constant pulse check of, where am I heading? How can I communicate this to my team? What's my goals? Am I assessing myself? It's so important, and we stress that, to assess yourself. Those are your foundations. So we'll be very respectful of the time, Luisa. I think that there's a lot of questions around this topic, and it's been a pleasure. And just like Nim said, feel free to reach out. No, we're not transactional. The truth is that you probably give us more insight, and we're just gonna connect the dots there. So a pleasure to be in touch with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we arrived to the end of the webinar. Of course, we have a lot of comments and maybe some conversations just to start here. And of course, we want to follow them after this webinar, in direct and private. Of course, we are going to share the presentation and the contact from Daniela and Nim for specific comments and short cases and talk with. So we thank you very much to all. I don't know if I would like your final comment, one phrase to finish and close. And thank you very much to all for all to joining us. The presentation and your time today. We wish you an excellent day, and thank you very much, and see you in the next webinar.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Luisa. Thank you all.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Ciao.